We're here today with my very favorite prima of all time. I met, like all good relationships, online on Ancestry.com, which I always used to say is like a dating website, but you're all related, at least when it comes to New Mexico.
So true.
So we connected on Ancestry in like 2011 or 2012.
2011.
And just sort of emailed and went back and forth and had a few phone calls. I knew nothing, as you know. I had been disconnected from my dad's family for the most part, and he didn't know anything about his history. And so I had just done all this research, looking at the records, and she had all the stories that I didn't have. So we kind of like came together where some of the stories that she had backed up some of the records I had found. And she was able to sort of confirm a few things that I did know, but add so much dimension to it. We finally met, we realized in July of 2012, and just really hit it off. So her grandfather and my great-grandfather were brothers. And what is the story that you always heard?
It's one of my favorite stories, but I also saw eyewitness to it. My great-grandfather was born in 1877, so by the time I came around, he was already 8 years old. But by the time I became aware of my surroundings and visiting, I was probably about between 8 and 10. And there was a picture of Juan Andreas on the wall that anytime he passed it, he would touch it or touch the frame. One time when we were visiting, I looked over and I could see his eyes were teary. And then he spoke something to my mom. Both my grandma and both my grandparents knew Spanish, but they preferred, knew English, but they preferred to speak Spanish. They only spoke English if they had to take care of business. So it was kind of difficult. I picked up words, but obviously didn't know a lot, but it was my mother who related to me. And she said he was saying, "This is my savior. This man saved my life." And then as I learned the story, he definitely did. So my grandpa looked up to him immensely. Juan Andreas was older than my grandpa, and when their parents both died and they became orphans, unfortunately my grandfather was taken by someone who said that they were a cousin. And during the time that he was at this stay with this person, he was being abused. And he was taking a lot of beatings, especially when the man became drunk, and just worked him during the day like a workhorse. Somehow in the communities, my great uncle, Juan Andres, found out that this was happening and immediately went to the ranch to get his brother, which that's why he said he saved him. And the love for him was immense. My mom said he would sometimes just get choked up as when they would talk about Juan Andreas and the fact that he died during the Spanish flu, that he just knows his life would have been very different and had gone a whole different way if Juan Andreas had stayed alive. My grandma used to say it a little bit more bluntly. Elias, my grandpa, did not have business sense that Juan Andreas did. He had too much of a heart, so he was always giving people something. No, have an acre because you can't feed your family, and thank you for working for me through the season or whatever. So if it wouldn't have been for Juan Andreas, he probably wouldn't have accumulated what he did and was able to have a nice ranch outside of Clayton in the Moses area. And also because of Juan Andreas, he ended up marrying my grandma, because the woman he thought he wanted to marry, Juan Andreas nipped it in the bud really quick and said, "She's too little. She's just too much of a city girl," because she lived in the town of Clayton.
Big city of Clayton.
Big city of Clayton, of what maybe at that time might have maybe had, 100 people? I don't know. But it is true. My grandma was very tall, broad shoulders, which I got from her, and so strong that the joke used to be that Juan Andres said, "You have to meet her because she can whitewash the side of an adobe in 2 strokes," which obviously wasn't true, but she was a very strong woman. Bore 9 children, out in the cattle ranches, and also took care of the sick and the dying and did birthing.
Oh yeah. So on this trip, I just learned that your grandmother was a curandera.
Yes, she definitely. We didn't. Well, maybe
So cool.
that maybe that word was used, but it went over my. I don't speak Spanish, Ed, but I know for a fact that she only used herbs, only took care of everything natural. My grandfather, same thing. You know, he lived to 105. Didn't even get arthritis till 102. I find this very funny because when he was in this little place in Moses, they were cattle ranchers, but yet he didn't like to eat beef. He preferred his beans and his vegetables. It's kind of a
Ooh,
yeah.
man after my heart.
Yeah, totally loved his he'd say mama, which he called my grandma, makes the best beans, you know, and he loved it. And he loved the soup part of it. He would actually even use it and drink in his broth if he, you know, was wanting something warm to warm him up. And also he made incredible biscuits. My mom said she loved it because he always wore long sleeve shirts, of course, but when he was making biscuits, he put up his sleeves. She said that skin was just as white as the flour, and she could even picture him making these incredible biscuits when he made the biscuits for the family. But Juan Andreas knew Natividad's brother, which is Jesus Trujillo, who was on the Trujillo ranch, and the two men said, Elias, you need to be with a woman that can handle this kind of life, so we want you two to meet. And they met on a Sunday, and they were married that next Saturday.
Oh my God!
Yes.
I didn't remember that.
Oh, you didn't? They always made a joke at their 70th wedding anniversary. They almost made 75, but she passed away. There was this huge family there, and I would have to ask other people for the numbers, but it's quite large for just the base family. Because they had the 9 children, 2 died very young of pneumonia, but out of the rest of them, except for my mom, many of them had 5, 6 kids, so it was quite a big group at that anniversary. And the person that was talking with at that particular anniversary, I even remember it, it was so cute. They said, did you ever think that little buggy ride, because that's what they told them to do, was take a little buggy ride around the Trujillo property, would ever turn into all of these people? I'm sure they didn't, but it was quite humorous, and it was definitely part of the family lore.
And then I remember when we met and we started doing genealogy trips, like the one thing you really, really wanted was their marriage record. And you couldn't find it.
No.
Couldn't find it. Couldn't find
No.
it.
The very first time, right before I met you, we went to go visit my husband's friends in Oklahoma. On the way back, we made a stop in Clayton, which was someplace I had not been since I was little. And was very lucky, extremely blessed that all these pieces just fell in. The priest of the church took me to the Moses church. He also told me that the records only started in 1907 that were still legible and in these books that they had in St. Francis, which is the main church in Clayton, not Little Sacred Heart that's out in the Moses area. That particular small church had been destroyed in a flood. They had rebuilt it, and he believed that there might still be those water-stained records back. There was this storage unit that he was going to try to go through and find, especially after I told him these years were missing. It wasn't just me, other people were looking too. Unfortunately, when I went back like 2 years later, he said all of that had been cleaned out and the records were not there. There wasn't anything from the time period, which would have been like 1890 for that area, including some of the Oklahoma records that had gone to that church until they were just destroyed in the flood. They were probably wet and people just got rid of them. That's also when they started having the baptismals, confirmations, marriages at that little church, but then taking those records to the big church in Clayton and for safekeeping. The good news is that they had this wonderful city and county building. So on our visit, we went into there and looked through those books, and there was nothing. There was no marriage record. Looked under all names, hoping it had been misfiled. And then she was kind enough to go back, and every time she went back to do her family history, she also kept looking, because sometimes you do find them misfiled. On one of her visits, and I was just elated, she was reading the newspapers, and she found the actual wedding announcement. It's a beautiful written announcement by a friend of the family talking about this handsome man with this beautiful woman being married, and this young couple starting their life. And Juan Andreas was the county clerk and also known very well in the community, and it said in there, that it was the brother of Juan Andreas. At that time you would kind of think it was a little bit of a big deal to be part of Juan Andreas's line. And then, but still no actual wedding wording. You dig everywhere when you're researching. You understand, and I learned from other people. I can't take all the credit of what I know. I felt like a sponge, and I was very lucky to have a woman who took her time with me and was patient in helping me understand. I mean, talk about somebody that I'm in awe of what she knows. I will never know as much as she probably has in her pinky, and I say that's true.
Who's that, Pat?
Pat, yes, and so willing to help. Oh my goodness, so willing to help. She's the one that taught me that many times the priests, there wasn't a priest at every little one of these chapels, even to this day. Now that particular chapel still stands, but they only have a service out there once a year. It had gone down to once a month, so other cousins that came there after 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, they did have them out in the ranch area once a month. But I learned, and this is one of the things that's hard in your research that you will find, if you're looking for your family, like I was in Clayton, you then have to understand that that priest, back in the day before cars, would do a service, and then he put his little records in his satchel to go on to the next church. And sometimes those records were left there. Unfortunately, sometimes those priests were killed or died on the trail, and those records are just gone forever. But then other times it might be, for an example, that they will be in one area and you'll find your record in many, many towns over, which back there with travel, you know that that's not where the family took their child to be baptized or took themselves to be married. That's not what happened. So that was quite the biggest thing I learned from her, was don't just give up like I had. Oh, it's not in Clayton, it's never going to be found. Fast forward a few years, I'm very lucky. I know I had looked every way I could possibly, every place I could possibly. We looked through the books, we looked, maybe it went to Trinidad, maybe it went just everywhere. And then finally, one of our Pacheco cousins, who is now, whose family ended up being a Rodriguez, so Elias and Juan Andreas' sister Antonia, that particular person, Kevin, I'm so grateful for his dedication to look everywhere, found my grandparents' actual written word in Mosquero, New Mexico, which just never would have thought that that's where the record would be found. And even mentioning the little area in which they were married. So it was quite a find in 2021. And
that was just in 2021, so that took probably 10 years.
11 for me. 10, 11, yeah. Because I first looked in 2010.
And I found that newspaper account in like 2019, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, because I remember when we went to the Albuquerque Library and we were brand new, but Henrietta was there assisting that day, or she met us there, I think. And we, of course, were total dummies.
So dumb. I mean, it's almost embarrassing, the questions we were asking her, especially as the years went by, and we learned what a brilliant and incredible part she plays in the New Mexico gene. As a matter of fact, remember the librarian that day said to us, "How did you get Henrietta to come help you?" A friend of ours. I mean, really, she should not have been there. That was a total favor.
Yeah, so I remember that, and I had an ancestor that were married. It was some of my Sanchez's that were married in Trinchera Plaza. They were from Trinchera Plaza, which I just finally visited for the first time.
Oh, nice.
But they were married by an Presbyterian minister or something like that.
That makes sense because some of the priests left or was excommunicated and became Presbyterian.
Well, she gave, because I was like, why would they go to him to do this? And she gave me like 3 reasons, and I wrote them all down.
Yeah.
Like, it could have been a timing issue because the priest wasn't going to come back out. Like maybe they were pregnant and needed to get this like taken care of quickly, but the priest wasn't going to be out there, or like, just a lot of different reasons why maybe they got married at a weird place or not their typical location. Maybe because there was some timing issue because were going to get married right away for
Right.
whatever reason. They couldn't. The priest wasn't going to be at Moses, so they went to Mosquero.
And sometimes it happened, especially in the Taos area. They were supposed to have fees, and if you didn't have the money to do it, some of the priests refused to marry you, and so they just go get married by somebody else, and then maybe later have it blessed, because you even see that in the records sometimes, where it'll say, or they'll say by need of necessity, which doesn't always mean that somebody's pregnant, but it might mean that they're starving. The woman had been married before, her husband had died, the children are in bad shape, and you see this marriage, and then later on they let it be a Catholic baptism, and then the same day they're married again in the Catholic Church. It's all very interesting. Of course, we would love a time machine and be able to go back, but you piece it together, you get a feel for what might have been happening.
Yeah, well, I love the story about finding your grandparents' marriage record, because it definitely is a great example of when you give up on, as somebody with a gigantic adobe brick wall that I feel like will never come down. It's inspiring to, okay, well, maybe let's just give it another 10 years and something will turn up. I don't know.
Turn up. I would never thought it was there.
So at some point after we met and connected, and I don't remember how we got started or how many we did, but we started taking genealogy trips.
The best
thing
time of
ever.
my life. Yeah.
So fun.
Yeah, so fun.
Like once a year.
Yes.
For many years, we would meet in New Mexico, or I would come out to you, and we'd come down together.
You always came and got me.
And then we would go walk the land, go try to dig up records,
Just see the
get
places.
into trouble, trespass.
Leave the ATM card at a casino and have to go back. Not that we were gambling, I just needed money, but of course, that's when the brain was starting to fail.
Hopping fences. Yeah.
I'm on oxygen now, so that'd be a little bit more difficult, but I plan on hopefully getting a few more trips under my belt.
Yeah, we've scaled back a little bit, but
Yes.
those early trips were a little dicey, out in the middle of nowhere.
Yes.
Probably our most classic day was I think we spent 8 hours.
Yeah, at least.
Driving up and down this dirt road trying to find the Barella Cemetery.
Which everybody says it's so easy to find. Asking anybody on the road, could you give us directions? And nobody could give you directions. It was so crazy. Oh, well, yeah, I've been there. It's just, and it would be wrong. We were on Google Map. I mean, we never found it.
Never found it.
Never found it.
No, but those have just been some of the most fun times, and we discovered a lot.
We did.
We did find a lot during those trips.
The being at the Los Luceros, and actually seeing before you entered, and they say it's the original, before you enter the home, there is a place where they used to scrape their boots. And to know that Antonio Maria Pacheco, the father of Juan Andreas and Elias and many others, actually probably put his boots there. But we know for sure he was in the home.
Yeah, he was the first sheriff of Rio Arriba County after the U.S. took over, and they were stationed. There's a reference in a book of him being sheriff there and being part of those court proceedings.
Yes, with some of the French Canadian trappers. It's just so fascinating, so fascinating. That was one of my favorite.
Yeah.
When there's been many, but I just remember, as silly as it may sound, looking down at that boot scraper and thinking, oh my God, my great great grandfather, who was born in 1812, and people say, wait a minute, that can't be right, you've got that wrong. Well, my grandpa was the second to the youngest. And
of 19.
Of 19, and he was born in 1877. His father was born in 1812. He had 3 wives. First 2 died, and then his 3rd wife is where he had the most children with. And then you figure my grandfather and grandma had 9 children, with my mom being the third to the youngest, being born in 1917. And then I was an oops baby. She said bonus, but let's be real, she was 42 and my dad was 44. So that was just unheard of, and that is why there is such a huge gap, and why my grandparents were already in their 80s when I was born. So to know that somebody born in 1812, my great-grandfather, stood there and was a part of this and was in that building and was in that area, and we would even look, because there's only one little bridge that goes over this water, and it's the only way to get there, and to know he had his horse and went over there, it makes you just want to make a movie from the Hispanic side of all these people that isn't done enough.
So, what was one of your favorite finds that you found in your family over the years?
Well, obviously, I didn't find him myself, but obviously the marriage was big. The one that was the most difficult and had everyone looking, and we are talking some of the amazing researchers, we just looked and looked and looked. There's always been a speculation and confusion with my grandma's, on my dad's side, birth certificate, because it's folded, and even when they got the original, you can't quite read out the handwriting. Plus back then they kind of did things phonetically, and unfortunately it makes sense why they had it spelled S-I-L, and it looks like it says I-S, but it's actually I-E-R. It's Seiler. And that particular journey took quite a life of its own. Many years, of trying to find who was her father. And it turns out it's a man named Martin Seiler, who came from Germany, was born in 1834. We definitely know for sure when he made it into New Mexico. There's theories on why he did. There is a Seiler that's in the records at Fort Union, another one of our trips. Clarified it and made me understand that the Seiler that was in there was not, that was shown up in the muster rolls, was not my great-great-grandfather. But then we found a census finally, and Martin Seiler is definitely listed there. The theory has been that he either mustered out, which unfortunately those records have not been found. There is hopefully one day maybe a trip to the big archives, but even the people that have looked a little bit, that are better researchers than I am, have not yet found out for sure. There is a Martin Seiler that came through Ellis Island and that definitely applied for his naturalization, that is probably him, but there's 3 more at the same time period, but they're in different parts of the United States. So whatever happened that made this man who get to New Mexico, which probably was, he was in the military, or he was there at Fort Union to work. In the census that we found, Martin Seiler is definitely there with the military. And I've even gone through and traced every single person that was on there in hopes that I could find him, that he went back and then maybe came to New Mexico. But the ranger told us many times if they found a wife or they found a woman in the area who could have been working in Fort Union, that was a hustle and bustle place during the Civil War, and there was so many farmers and so many ranchers and people that were there that was working for Fort Union, or for that matter, it could have been her brother that introduced him. But definitely this man from Germany ended up marrying my Hispanic grandma, Barbara Tafoya. Finding him and learning that my grandma, who I've always said looked more German than Spanish, was definitely German, and then now, of course, having my DNA done, and other members of the family having the DNA done, it fits. There was some family lore that wasn't necessarily correct, but with the facts that we now have the entire family on board. They had the right story, but they just had it off a generation. That this family, Martin Seiler, once he had his children, one of the children, his daughter, Martina Seiler, ended up marrying a man named James Gilbert. And the Gilbert line is another avenue, but the bottom line is we were able to prove that this English man, Gilbert, also had married Spanish women, and this German man had married Spanish women, which from what I understand was not uncommon for the Germans started coming into New Mexico for work. You know, when they came into the United States, they heard, and many of them were already farmers, and there was land to be given, and they flocked to New Mexico. The English is a little bit different. We're not quite sure why he was there. We do know that he was a miner, but this family ended up being my line on my line on my father's side, the Gilberts and Martin Seiler. Finding Martin Seiler's information and learning that he came from Germany, born in 1834 and came to the United States, and by 1860 was having children with my grandma Barbara Tafoya, was probably the biggest find for all of us, because we had all been looking and learning that we were correct, that the people in the family that did not believe her last name was Silas was correct. It was Seiler when she got married.
So there were two Martin Seilers at Fort Union?
Yes, that's what's so difficult. But it's one of them is spelled Siler, and he is Sielar. So a lot of the family have always thought they have to be the same. There is not proof yet that he is one and the same, because the problem is the census shows this one Martin Seiler, which is spelled more Sielar, but then in confinement, this Siler is there for desertion. And then later, when the ranger looked into the record, that man went back to Kansas, where he was the Mounted K, Kansas. You know, that's one of those things we haven't been able to find yet.
Well, I think when we were there, we were thinking, what are the odds that there would be two Martin Seilers in New Mexico at that time?
Yes, we did. But
you can't always follow that logic.
No, and I didn't he declaim, I'd have to go back and look again, but I think he also said Seiler was, that was it. Seiler was the name, but it wasn't his last name. Wasn't that it?
Oh, I don't.
Now I'm going to have to go back and reread my emails. Sorry. That was a little confusing. I'll have to go back, because he did write us. He was wonderful and wrote this great letter as to why they're definitely two different people. They're so similar.
Oh, yeah. So he got back to you later.
He did.
That's nice.
Yes, because I came back and started spreading my information, and there were some of the family that wasn't going to buy it. They just felt he was a soldier in and served at Fort Union. But definitely we learned for sure with the digging, if he ends up being the one that's there, he didn't go there from New Mexico, because that didn't happen. Fort Union was a place they came through. So he didn't join at Fort Union. And it says on there that he was Mounted K Company, the one Seiler that we find. But is it him? Sad thing is, because there is so much confusion, and not uncommon, they would sometimes take other men's names.
Well, my famous Pablo just totally changed his name, and we don't really know where he came up with the new name. When he abandoned his family at Fort Union after the Civil War, during the Civil War, he just probably took the name from
someone who had died,
some other
or
dude.
Somebody there that had, or was leaving or whatever. So, I understand. I definitely understand. When you do genealogy, you have to have an open mind, because there are some things you're just not going to prove. And to me, at this point, this is one of them. I keep hoping one day we'll be able to figure out who he is. I would love to be, like her Pablo O'Leary. The ranger had so much information.
Oh
on
my
him.
gosh.
Oh
It was
my
like
gosh.
we were on an episode of Who Do You Think You Are, or
Totally.
whatever.
I mean, he even was showing us the little.
He lost the cap to his ammunition pouch and had to pay this much money to replace it,
Exactly.
or whatever.
And so he's showing us this ammunition
He
pouch.
brought his own horse, but then this officer took it, and here's why. And it was amazing.
It was so fascinating. So fascinating. I always tease her and I say it's because you had your little short shorts on. And he spent all this time with us, which maybe might not be true, but he was so nice.
I think at that time you didn't know about Martin Seiler at that time,
Not
or
as
like
much as
there
I
was
know now.
something, yeah.
Yeah. All I knew was from work that somebody else had previously done, my cousin Norma. And she definitely, you can see the records. It even comes up on Ancestry.com. You can see the records of that man in there, and we thought it was because he was sick. But this man this ranger went and actually looked at all the men that were on this and said, no, that's not him, that's somebody else. He was in there because he was deserted and he was actually in chains. Like, oh, let's hope it's not him. But it might have been. I mean, we don't know. Who knows? We just won't know.
And what was the story with Barbara Tafoya? Like, I remember she was in Trinidad, because I remember we took a trip to Trinidad,
Yes,
and we're looking for her.
Once again, looking through books, and I said, do you find anything with Barbara Tafoya? Because we never understood why they separated. They never divorced, but they ended up separating. And we knew that from later with other relatives, that he ended up with his two sons in a different part of New Mexico. And she found an actual baptismal record for a child that she gave up for adoption. And it was definitely our Barbara, and we found her in census records. Unfortunately, she died, and there was a record of her death, not the actual death certificate because they hadn't started those yet, but there was a record that she died of cancer.
Cool.
But she did definitely, why they broke up, why they separated, who knows, but she was in Trinidad. But her history, the very first time you see them is in Sapio and in Mora. They definitely were there's many baptisms for their children. But if you can imagine with that thick German accent, and the Spanish priests, or, that most of them were Spanish or French, those misspellings of those names are pretty hysterical, and especially her last name. Finally, it took a lot of work. Tafoya was not really her name. Her name was really Medina, because she had been a natural-born child of her mother named Medina, when her husband, Bueno, was on what they term walkabout. We don't know if he was on a hunting trip. We don't know if he'd been captive by the Indians and then later released, but he's definitely missing in census records, and then all of a sudden shows back up.
Oh.
But that's what was confusing. And then she took the name Bueno for a while. So in some of the baptismals, you'd see Bueno, and in other baptismals, you see Tafoya. And it was really confusing. Like I said, there was about 9 people working on that, 2 of them extremely profound in their work in the New Mexico research line. Finally, Henry found a birth certificate, clear as could be, of Barbara being born to her mother, Felipe Medina Picaris. I don't get the names right. Please forgive me. To this day, I have a few that I trip over really badly.
So where was she living when she met Martin? Mora.
So-
Because that was pretty close to Fort Union.
Yes.
So there was a lot
yes.
of,
Well, that's
yeah.
where their second baptismal is. The others were in.
Were they living in Mora, or was one of their, like, Ocotay or Guadalupita or something like that?
According to some of the records, they were supposedly, but we've never found them in 1860. The first time we find them in Mora is in 1870, very clear cut, and we can't find her in 1860. But she is with her family and parents, her mother, and Bueno, and she's going by Bueno in Mora. And then all of a sudden, she's a Tafoya. Talk about trying to make a person nuts. But
Yeah,
but
all
all
these-
the records definitely prove that that's her. So those finds were huge. The biggest one, of course, being that my poor little grandma died, unfortunately, not knowing her real last name. That it was Seiler all these years.
Oh.
She thought it was Silas. And we called her Little Grandma because she was never over 4'10" and never weighed over 90 pounds, I'm told. Even when she was pregnant, she just had this little, like, soccer ball, and that was it. And she never ate off of anything but saucers. I do remember that. She didn't want to eat off a big plate. She just ate off of saucers. Littlest
Wow.
thing. Little tiny thing.
Wow.
But tough. Very tough. You don't mess with Little Grandma.
Wow. So another interesting thing that you've worked on is coal mining. So you've had a few ancestors that were coal miners, like in the Raton area and around,
Brilliant, New Mexico, which is a ghost town now, but back then it was one of the biggest little bustling places for the coal mining. My particular line was part of the very large Fee Hill land grant. And unfortunately, as these things go, when my great-great-grandfather passed away, my grandma was not allowed to have land because the United States did not allow women to own land. She signed it over to her brother-in-law and unfortunately ended up not letting her have the land or the worth of it. So her sons needed to go to work. And the best place to go to work during that time, since they didn't want to be farmers, was to go be in the mines. So we knew this, and I knew that my grandpa had been arranged a marriage with my little grandma, and this was all done in the Raton area. Of our trips, I had been told by Norma, who by luck was also doing the tracing way before we had met her, because she had come from an adopted part of the family, and she started out just looking at film at the actual centers back in the day before you could do this online for a good 10-15 years trying to find her family. Once again, we met online, and she had a lot of tips as to different places to go look for information. She said, a great place is the Raton Library. They'll help you a lot. And that is anybody that's working with anyone that is in the mining and would like to find any of the records. There was a person, which is just unbelievable, had all of these mining records from all these different mining companies. And when they died, their ancestors found them and gave it to the library. And literally back then, I understand it's different now, but back then, they didn't even have them in alphabetical order yet the first time she went. She was down there in 6 years, for 6 hours in this basement, just filthy, trying to put some of them in some kind of order. And she found some, but didn't get to look through all of them because you do run out of time. And so when she sent me, if you're going to be down there, ask about them. By then they put them in alphabetical order, but my being me and wanting to make sure nothing was lost, I just went through every single record. But it was easier. They were in nice boxes. I could just go through them with my fingers and not lay them all down on the ground and try to go through them. And then they let me make copies. And it's fascinating because it tells so much of the story when they were making their records and giving the names. They were who their parents were, who were their living siblings, where did the siblings live. So you learn where they had maybe moved to different areas, or by that time some of them, my little grandma was, as we call her, had been married and ended up in Denver, and it just was it's a great place to find records if you're involved in anything with the mining. In my particular situation, my dad and his siblings were all born at home in this little mining camp called Brilliant. And that particular camp was actually known to be quite the little bustling place. I have since found records in a book that's called The Ghost Towns Mining Camps of New Mexico, and you can see an idea of what it looked like. When we were on our trip, was kind enough to take me to two of them. I think one of them was Cokedale, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
There was another one too that we went to.
Primero or something.
Something. I hate this that you can't remember stuff. Beginning to sound like my mother when I'd ask her all these questions. I don't remember Etha. So we did find a lot of information in those and got a really clear picture of what had happened during that time. Even had a report on the accident that had hurt my grandfather, that had caused him horrible pain his whole life with his leg. Some of the families say that's what he died of, but I also have some of the families that he died of cancer. But I was only 3 when he died, so I'm not really sure. But I do have a little Christmas tree he gave me that he wanted me to have. And that was also the first time I'd really been saddened by seeing people in a nursing home, because my grandparents lived with us and he hated it there so much, and he'd just tell my mom, just take me home, just throw me a tortilla in the corner once in a while, but just get me out of here, you know. But unfortunately he was too sick and he really did need to have 24-hour care. That was not possible. And he had been a miner. Very hard work. My dad and his brothers, thank goodness, did not end up going that route, because my grandma, she took these 4 boys by the time these 4 children by the time she was 18, 3 girls and a boy, because they married her off just prior to 14, because her mother, Martina Seiler, had passed away, and that was common for the men back then. If they didn't remarry right away with someone that wanted to take care of the children. And in this case, we were told that the woman said, I don't want to take care of all the children. They just start marrying them off or putting them into families or whatever. But Grandma got married just shy of 14. And she came to Denver. Many, many years we just assumed she had done it on her own. We later learned there were cousins that, she was coming too. She didn't just pick Denver and decide to come. It was not uncommon for that area to start making their way into Denver. The mixing of the nationalities during that time period was pretty common, but unfortunately for some people, they find it difficult to recognize that they didn't stay separate. They definitely had no problems with the mixture. Work area, and let's be honest, Hispanic women are beautiful.
Yeah, I remember I did my ex-husband's genealogy, and his family was from Chicago. In Chicago, you hear about all the different ethnic neighborhoods, and there's the Hungarian neighborhood and the Polish neighborhood, and they have their own organizations or their own bars or whatever. So I was expecting no mixing at all, but it was all over the place.
That's what makes us Americans.
Yeah.
That's what makes us Americans. We are high in 57, melting pot. We should, the joke is, if you come from New Mexico, you're related, and it's true. Anybody I've met, if you trace it back far enough, you might be 16th cousins, but you are related. There was only 5 families who started New Mexico. But we definitely come from those families, all of us, some way, somehow. There wasn't that many people back in 1700.
No.
No.
All right. Thanks for sharing.
Well, thanks
I'm
for having me.
sure we'll have you back again because there's just too much to talk about. And you have all the knowledge and all the stories.
Well, thank you. I'll try to keep my ducks in a row so that I don't get confused as I'm speaking.
I mean, for years, you have all these stories, and I've said, like, can we need to get these on paper or whatever? And that's been, I know, challenging. So maybe
I write stories and I put them in Word, but I have never really done what I've liked to do, which would be a book. And I feel the same way. All my stories came from my mom, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins that were way older because I was so young, that they got them from their parents. And I don't want to see them lost. I think it'd be very sad that that these people are erased because at this time, just like me, the younger ones don't want to be bothered, but I just know in a time they will. And luckily, some of them are coming forth. What do you know about? So it's nice.
The podcast will be a way to sort of share some of those stories and get those recorded.
And maybe people will be out there that know more.
Yeah,
that contact
well, that's
us.
kind of what I was thinking too, which you already dropped a few, but like, if there's, what's one of your...
Seiler.
Still?
Oh, yeah, because we don't know for sure the details. And once they came into more like Colorado, Trinidad area, several of them became, I'm going to have to spell it because I'm not really quite sure how they pronounce it, Sialas. Silas.
I've seen that.
Yes. Yeah. Really big in the Trinidad area. And that came from Alejandro Seiler. And either the priest or that's what they thought. Look at who we just had lunch with when we had lunch with our friend that her family was Polish miners. And many of the names were changed either by the company store or the person typing up their records or something. That's what they heard, and that's what it became. Yeah. So anybody out there that knows anything about a Martin Seiler or Silas, please contact us. Supposedly there were only 5 in the United States during this time period, so we'd love to find the right one.
Okay,
Thank you.
There you go. All right, well, we will talk to you later.
Great.
Thanks, Prima.
Good luck.
Thanks for listening to Luminaria. You can reach me at luminariapod@gmail.com. Our intro and outro music is of Varsoviana, performed by Nieves Anaya and his daughter Ernestina Anaya at Arroyo Hondo, New Mexico in 1940. It's part of the Juan Bautista Rael collection at the Library of Congress.